VBAC versus HBAC. One of the questions I get asked often is whether to plan a VBAC in hospital or at home. And the truth is, there isn't one right answer. Today, I want to walk you through some of the differences between a HBAC, which is a home birth after caesarean, and a hospital VBAC, so you can better understand your options. So, what do these terms mean? VBAC is vaginal birth after caesarean section, and HBAC is home birth after caesarean. Both involve vaginal birth after caesarean, informed decision making, birth preparation, supportive care providers, and understanding the benefits and the risks. Hospital VBAC. So, what are some of the possible benefits of birthing in a hospital system? So, first of all, access to hospital resources. You don't have to purchase anything. Most things are provided. You've got your bed. One thing I love about working with women in a hospital setting as a birth doula is that there's no cleanup involved, because the midwives do all the cleanup in the hospital setting. And as a doula, when I'm attending a home birth, I have a lot more cleanup. Now, if you're the birthing woman, it really doesn't matter, because you're birthing, you don't have to do any of the cleanup, but your birth team will be doing a lot of the cleanup. But you need to provide some of those things and some of the equipment, and just have those things thought out beforehand. You might be familiar with the hospital setting. Now, unless you've really been into the hospital before, of course, you've already had a hospital birth, or you've had a birth where you've ended up in hospital if you've had a C-section before. So there may be some familiarity, or you may feel a little bit safe in the hospital because you know that's the place where you can be cared for when you're sick or when you need help. Some women feel safer there, which is pretty much what I just said before, but women do feel safer sometimes, especially when they have fears or when they are unsure what their actual risks are. They may feel safer. So if you feel that you 100% are going to need care providers and you're going to need a C-section, I would probably say that there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, a bit of unpacking of some fears and beliefs as well, and to understand the knowledge and understand exactly what is going to help you achieve a vaginal birth, because a lot of women are unwilling to do the work and understand all of those things. And so therefore they feel a lot safer in the hospital because they believe in their mind and in their heart that, well, I've had this C-section before, so it's going to happen again. But I know that you're different, because you're here watching this video and you're really thinking about all of those options, and that makes you 100 steps ahead of everyone else who is thinking about this already. The other thing is immediate access to theatre if required. Obviously, if you need a theatre, like right there, right now, there's going to be a theatre there available that you can go into, provided that they've got them free and that sort of thing. Depending on where you are for your home birth, you might be 10 minutes away, you might be half an hour away. In the unlikely event that you absolutely need an emergency C-section in that moment. So some of the challenges that women experience in a hospital is quite often the continuous monitoring requirements. So CTG monitoring is something that they often want VBAC women or women planning a VBAC to have. There is a lot of evidence around CTG, and we've got evidence that CTG doesn't improve outcomes for mothers or for babies. And so that's definitely something to consider versus intermittent monitoring. You can still choose intermittent monitoring in a hospital system. I've supported women in hospital to do that, and that is absolutely something you can do, but it's just another thing that you have to kind of fight for. I'm going to say one of the things is that you often have to fight for your rights to have a vaginal birth. So if you find a supportive provider, you then often have to fight your way through that and decline your way through all of the interventions that potentially could reduce your chance at having a vaginal birth as well. And that's definitely something that's really challenging for a lot of VBAC women. Time limits. Often women are put on time limits when it comes to birth. And so rather than allowing the physiological process to unfold and being able to have time and space the way that you should when you're in a birth, a lot of women are put on a timer. And depending on the staff rotations, if the doctor just wants you to have the baby before they have to go and clock off, that can really limit your ability to birth. Sometimes every hospital's different and every outcome's different. But, that's why some women end up having repeat cesareans in the end. They've gone to all this trouble learning, advocating, and all these things, and then they end up in hospital on a timer and get pushed into another C-section. And so that's one of the things that you have to concern yourself with when you're birthing in a hospital system. Induction pressures. So many women are having inductions, not because they need them, just because it is a normal thing to do in the hospital system. They want to manage birth because they are risk adverse and they feel a lot safer practicing with medicalized births versus allowing the physiological process to happen. So from intellectual ability, I can understand that. If I was more comfortable with facilitating medical births, that's an induction, an induced birth, that's doing birth on my time with my staff, when it suits me, so I can go to golf on the weekend or manage my clients, whatever it is, manage the staff rotation. I understand why managing birth is important because at the end of the day, it's business, right? In a hospital system, a lot of the time, they have to worry about all of these things. And personally, I don't want to end up in major surgery because of those reasons. Those reasons to me are not good enough for women to be having C-sections, major surgeries, to be put at risk in the first place. I don't think that they're good enough. I understand them on an intellectual level. Totally reasonable, right? I get it. I understand that, but it's still not good enough for women to be having C-sections for that reason. The other challenges is hospital policies. There's a lot of hospital policies and guidelines that you may need to look at, not just for VBAC, but just in general. For me, I'm a bigger woman, so I had to look up the plus size guidelines, and I wanted to get across that and how they would normally treat a plus size woman. Then I looked up the VBAC guidelines. Then I had gestational diabetes. I was one of the women that was caught here in Australia. We lowered the rates for gestational diabetes. And if I was tested with today's tests or even 10 years ago, before they changed it was actually 11 years ago when they changed it, because I literally just, the changeover happened when I had my first baby. I failed one of the tests. So you have 3 tests for the GTT by 0.1. And that put me in the GD category. And essentially, having that GD title really does put you in that category of, being pushed into an intervention, an induction, and ending up in a C-section, pushes your risk of a C-section up. So it's all those things that you've got to be across when you're basically going to birth in somebody else's environment with their rules, what they want to do with their structure. It's a completely different thing. So that's another thing that you need to consider when you birth in a hospital system. Difficulty moving around. It can be challenging moving around sometimes, especially if you're hooked up to machines and things, like having that continuous monitoring. We don't understand sometimes when we're going to the birth system, when we're going to the hospital system, what an intervention could mean for your birth outcomes and for your birth unfolding. So you need to understand, if I'm going to consent to this intervention, having this continuous monitoring, can I still walk around? Can I still go to the toilet? Can I still go into the shower? Am I able to move around freely? Because some of the time what happens is women get stuck on the bed and told that they need to be stuck on the bed, and then before you know it, it's very uncomfortable. So you're consenting or asking for an epidural, and then that's it. You're not moving from that space most of the time after that experience. The other thing is different care philosophies, because it is important to understand, as I mentioned before, everyone has different philosophies. So if you are used to facilitating and supporting medicalized births, then that's where you're going to feel most comfortable. That's where your clients are going to lead down most of the time. That's your comfort zone. You're going to do the same things to most of this. This woman gets treated the same as this woman, and they're probably going to have very similar sort of outcomes. So if you want to have a physiological birth, you need to look at who facilitates physiological births. So I was getting a bit of a tongue tie there. Who facilitates those type of births the most? And how often does this person facilitate that birth? Because you might find that they never actually facilitate it and they only see it 10% of the time. And in the hospital system, it is a much lower chance of a physiological birth than if you were to plan a home birth, for example. So let's talk about home births, right? Home births get a really bad rap, and I'm kind of sick of it because I think home births are great. I understand there's a lot of fear. We women were birthing hundreds of years ago in home births, and I'll do a whole nother video on home births because I just love talking about home birth. But that's where all of our ancestors were giving birth, right? We talk about home birth being dangerous and women dying. I wanted to set the record straight. Yes, women did die in home births. Women did die in vaginal births. We see it in all the movies. We see it in all the TV shows. I think all of Disney movies pretty much killed off all the mothers. Like, where was Ariel's mother from The Little Mermaid? She was non-existent. She probably died in childbirth. I mean, Bambi's mum got killed in a fire, so it wasn't childbirth. But so many mothers got killed in movies, and they all died from childbirth pretty much. And so we have some amazing things that we just didn't have a few hundred years ago. The first being antibiotics. Antibiotics are so life-changing and life-saving, right? If you have an infection, antibiotics is, a game changer. The other thing is retained placentas and postpartum hemorrhages. So if you have a retained placenta, you're going to need surgery for that and have that removed surgically, which is pretty much, you can get it removed. I've had this experience, and I'll go into this experience in another video, but essentially they put their hands inside you and they pull the placenta out. But that's a very, very, very painful experience. I speak from experience myself. So I opted to be put under in theatre, and they do the same process, but you can't feel it. And usually something like that happens if the birth is disturbed, the hormones aren't working, or you don't have access to the Pitocin that they will inject into your leg after if you opt to have that support in a hospital setting or in a home birth setting. So if you birth with a home birth midwife, she has the skills to be able to facilitate the placenta coming out. She's got the medicines, all of those sorts of things. And then if you were to have a postpartum hemorrhage and blood loss, we now have access to blood readily. We have blood banks. We just didn't have that sort of thing before. So really, when you're thinking about it, it's that we've got a lot of more cleanliness happening in births. We understand that we shouldn't be putting our hands up women's vaginas without gloves on, sterile gloves, if it's absolutely necessary. Whereas 100 years ago, when obstetrics, or maybe 150 years ago, when obstetrics was being created, as in men decided they wanted to give it a crack and take control of birth, they were putting their dirty hands up women's vaginas without washing them properly. They were bringing women into hospitals and experimenting on them. There were a lot of mothers and babies dying in that environment because they were basically testing out their ideas, theories, and what they were learning from midwives as well. But they didn't even know that washing hands was an important thing to do. So it really comes back to cleanliness and having some of those very, what I call basic things. Everyone has access to antibiotics in Australia, USA, UK. I'm not going to say worldwide because I acknowledge that we come from a very privileged space of having these medical interventions that are life-saving, but they can be very damaging when they're overused. And we know that when it comes to overusing antibiotics and things like that, there are knock-on effects from overusing interventions. And that's a space that I come from. One of the reasons why women choose to have a home birth after cesarean, they are in a familiar environment. It's their home, it's their comfort, it's their space where they feel comfortable. They have greater freedom of movement. You don't actually have to beg to get into a birth pool. In the hospital system, it is surprisingly eerie how little women get into birth pools. In fact, a midwife recently said to me, "Oh, we're going to do we're going to get the birth pool going. I haven't done one of these for like months." And it's like, you are not facilitating water births and not seeing women get into birth pools. And me as a birth doula, I see that nearly every single birth that I'm attending, women getting into birth pools is just a normal thing, that it's like, of course you can get into a birth pool. It's just a bath. Like, it's not a big deal at the end of the day. The continuity of care. So if you hire a midwife for your home birth, you have that continuity of care with that midwife, a lot of the time she'll come to your home, depending on where you are in the world. So here in Australia, a lot of the time they'll come to your home. It's different wherever you are in the world. Sometimes they might have their care at a clinic. Sometimes if you go with hospital care, I know in the UK you can access home birth support publicly funded, but here in Australia a lot of the midwives will come to your home, which I absolutely love the idea of a midwife coming to my home and supporting me and giving me all of that care and love that I really would love to have. But you've got that continuity of care. So not only will she be with you throughout the pregnancy, she'll also be the person that comes to you during birth. Now, here in Australia, when you hire an obstetrician, you'll have that continuity of care throughout pregnancy, but they usually won't come to the birth until the very end of the birth. So you'll have random midwives supporting you. So you're not really getting that continuity of care throughout the birth period, which, you're paying for continuity of care, but then they pop their head in at the end. I'm sure some doctors will come in and be there for you throughout the whole time, but it's not what I'm hearing is the normal. It's usually, and sometimes depending on if they work the weekend that you're birthing on. So some obstetricians work where they don't work on certain weekends. So they have like a team of obstetricians. So they won't come in for your birth. You'll get whatever backup obstetricians working. So then you're not getting that continuity of care. You're getting some sort of shared care with somebody that you've maybe never even met before, who maybe doesn't even have the same birth philosophies as you either. There's a really strong physiological birth focus when you have a home birth, because you have to rely on your hormones. You have to rely on everything kicking off at home, going into spontaneous labor, allowing that oxytocin to flow, allowing everything to happen the way that it needs to unfold. And hopefully you set yourself up where you don't have too many disruptions and the process just happens. Just as you've grown your baby, you've conceived your baby, you've grown a whole baby, your body knows how to do the last part. This is the piece of cake part. Yes, it might be uncomfortable, it might be painful, but this is just ejecting out a baby out of your vagina the way that you're designed to do. And so I just see this as the final part. For me, pregnancy is really challenging. You've grown ears and you've grown noses and, a mouth and all of these intricate little details that your body knows how to do. Now the process is just pushing your baby down and out of your vagina to be born. And so when birth is facilitated in a safe way, when your nervous system feels safe, when you are comfortable, birth is going to unfold the way that it needs to. Women feel safer when they've had previous birth trauma, because going to a hospital after you've had trauma from that hospital, it might bring up triggers and you might feel unsafe. You might even end up in the same hospital, like the actual birth suite, or you might see the same people who were working there the last time you had your C-section. And so that could be quite triggering for some women. So going back to the same space is not feeling safe for some women who have had birth trauma. Feeling more relaxed at home. So obviously a lot of women feel a lot more relaxed and a lot safer at home. It's a lot more carefree a lot of the time, and just you can go outside if you want to, if it's the daylight, or say the moon's out, you can go outside. I know women who have birthed outside. I had a client who birthed outside under a tree in her backyard, and you have that freedom to be able to put your feet down on the grass if you want to go, like I've got this big swing outside in my backyard. I can go swing on that swing if I want to. I can do whatever I want, because in my experience, in my home, I am the boss and I feel like the boss. But when I go into a hospital, maybe I personally don't feel like the boss, but you definitely can go into the hospital with some boss attitude. So, I'm not going to say that that's not a thing. Higher chance of vaginal birth. So if you plan a home birth, you have a higher chance of achieving a vaginal birth. So the stats say 86 to 90% of women who plan a home birth will have a vaginal birth, so that they're much higher than the hospital. So the stats for the hospital are around about 76%. And again, that depends on the provider that you're birthing with. If you have a tolerant provider or a super supportive one, obviously if you have a really supportive provider, then you're going to have much higher chances of achieving your VBAC, versus if somebody only has a 20% success rate, for example. And also the hospital and what they support and what they facilitate. So really it's your provider is one of the most important things, but being in the space that makes you feel safe as well is one of the other things that really, really makes a difference. Some of the important considerations to think about when you're thinking about hospital or home birth is finding experienced providers. You don't just want to go with anyone who'll accept you. You really want to find somebody who is VBAC supportive, doesn't keel over when you mention you want to have a VBAC, who just thinks it's like just a normal thing. It's just a woman giving birth vaginally. That's the vibe that you're going for. You want to look at your local regulations, because in South Africa, for example, they won't allow midwives to attend home births with women who have had prior C-sections. So you might have to find somebody who's underground or a traditional midwife. I do know that there are some amazing traditional midwives who are very highly skilled, who will support that over there. However, it has been made illegal by the government, as far as I'm aware and understand. And I think some parts of some states in America as well. Here in Australia, it is legal to have a VBAC home birth, and I'm not really and I know in England as well it is legal, and I'm not sure about other places. But if you've got any questions, come in the comments, tell me where you are. We'll try to find answers, or tell us whether it's legal or whether it's not legal, because I love to hear from women all around the world and hear what you're going through and the situation that you're finding yourself in. Individual circumstances. So everyone has different individual circumstances, including financial situations. I don't like to see home birth as a luxury. So here in Australia, if you're a VBAC having a home birth, you will need to pay out of pocket around about 5,000 to 7,000 Australian dollars. I probably once would have looked at that as a luxury, like, if I had the money. Now I look at it as, I'm going to make sure I have the money. I'm going to save. I'm going to make this happen, because to me, it is something that is important to me. I think that when we have a will, we have a way. And I think do everything you possibly can to make that happen, because the alternative is potentially having a C-section. I'm not saying that a home birth guarantees you a vaginal birth. I'm just saying, if that's something that you really want to consider, don't allow your self-worth, you feeling like you're not deserving of that, or, I'm not the richest person in the world. We live pretty much on a single income, my husband with the 5 of us. So we're just saving up little bits and bobs just to try to make it work for our 4th baby, which we're trying to conceive at the moment. And I would really love to have a home birth midwife this time around. So, not everyone can access publicly funded home births. Sometimes we have to pay that. Sometimes our insurance, if you're in America, sometimes it covers, sometimes it doesn't cover. And I know everyone's in different situations, but if I was to go to the hospital here, public hospital, I could get that birth for free. Sometimes you have to think, just because it's free doesn't mean it's going to be good, And I think I learned that the first time with the way that I birthed the first time and the second time, which both ended up in C-sections. Consider your previous birth history. Think about what happened. Why did that happen? And get a birth debrief if you need one. I highly recommend birth debrief to understand what had happened, to talk to somebody who understands birth. I hold birth debriefs, but there are plenty of people out there who do them as well, and just really understanding so that you understand, did I need that C-section? Because a lot of the time I think women are still unsure on whether they needed that. So they're going into this VBAC experience thinking, can I do it? Like, it didn't work the first time. And then your partner might not believe that you can do it because they have an idea and they don't really understand vaginal birth or what happened in that birth experience. So it's highly, highly recommend that you do a birth debrief if you haven't done one already. And if you have and you still are looking for more answers, then do a second, do a third, do a fourth, because I certainly have done like heaps of them. I feel like I did at least 5 of them, but I think that I learned something more each time. And I really needed that understanding before I went on to have my VBAC after 2 cesareans. So look, the real question is, instead of asking which is safer, ask, where do you feel the safest? Where do you feel the emotional safety, the psychological safety, the physical safety? And where do you feel that you can trust you're going to be the safest? Now, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but you also have to be really honest about understanding what happened with your birth, because you might be feeling unsafe because you don't have the knowledge, you don't understand what had happened, having that birth debrief, understanding the information and knowledge. And then also you have to do like a nervous system reset and an unwiring of an unpacking of like what culturally makes you believe that a certain space is safer. So sometimes we believe that hospital birth is safer because our mothers and our sisters and our friends and everyone's doing it, right? So it can be a bit taboo. Now, I'm not here to convince you to have a home birth, because women have VBACs in hospital all of the time, right? I just want to say, I'm not telling you to have a home birth, but I just want to let you know that there is a bit of work to be done and there's a lot to consider when it comes to having a VBAC. And at the same time, some women do just go and have a VBAC without considering or doing anything. They're the lucky ones, right? They don't have to think or do anything. And babies just are born, Sometimes it's a short, quick labour. Sometimes they've stayed home for a long time and just transfer in at the last minute into that hospital. Sometimes they're having a baby on the side of the road, or sometimes they're having an accidental home birth. There's all different scenarios to consider. I don't believe there's one right way or one right birth setting for every woman. I believe women deserve access to information, support, and care that allows them to make decisions that feel aligned with their values and their circumstances. Whether you're planning a hospital VBAC or a HBAC, a home birth after caesarean, understanding your options is one of the most powerful things you can do. If you're preparing for a VBAC and want help understanding your options, grab my free VBAC starter kit now. I'll see you in the next video.